very little room by the nation state to confront the colonial master and say, this far and no farther. And the difficulty to confront that tension has resulted to insubordination, to the extent that some of the countries literally live from the West, not on the continent. They are placed in the continent, but live from the West. And probably you may have, just one example, you may have traveled from Africa to Europe. And in some countries, you have to go to Europe, you have to go through African country to get there. Yeah, you cannot go there directly, simply because there is this pseudo arrangement between nation states that somebody has to pass through the colonial master's territory before you go there. And so it is not a myth, it's a reality. We have seen it also being expressed in the way economic aspirations of African countries are determined, and there is always a tendency that African countries are always seen to be on the other side of the table. In other words, begging for existence and begging for support, as if they are not able to do it for their own. But let me tell you, my brothers, you and I know in leadership, nobody arrives at that stage without being led there. So there is this, what I would call permission that we have allowed ourselves as African countries to allow the extent of influence that, to a great extent, in my view, dehumanizes or takes away the dignity of African people, to the extent that...
And that's where I was coming to. I mean, we have allowed, to some extent, this interference. I don't know how you see it in your work, but I think to a great extent we have allowed it. Why don't we cut the umbilical cord now that we have come of age and begin to develop our own systems? Or is it that our leaders have a problem, so they have to keep the umbilical cord connected so that they keep getting some fringe benefits?
There's many sides to this scenario, why we have arrived to where we are, and we cannot correct what we see that makes us unhappy before identifying why in the first place did we end up there. You see, so we need to start addressing the cause of factors that have led us to a place of subserviency as a continent. And one part of that is because the leadership, our leadership, and the ruling political elite, to some extent, because of the difficulties of interest, some are self-interest, some are national interests that do not embrace citizen interest, that have culminated to poor negotiating capabilities in favor of African people. And so maybe perhaps one of the positive things that we could perhaps acclaim as a positive step towards gaining our face as a continent and our voice and our dignity on global platforms is the establishment of a structure like the African Free Trade Agreement, where now we are starting thinking, maybe if we have a collective voice, we are able to trade better at a global space rather than as an independent country approaching a Western country to increase her share of trading. So maybe that's one positive spread, but we have learned that so late in the day that we are now actually stuck in the details. How do we work together? Because of the colonial past and the many years of self-rule that has also strained our inter-country relationships, there is a huge level of mistrust. And therefore, it's crossing the barrier from where we are at the moment, even mentally, psychologically, to the space of abilities that we can do this thing together. We can trade better amongst ourselves and increase our own share in the global market is still a challenge. However, I must say that there is good progress being made, given the number of countries that have ratified the agreement. For example, if we talk about African trade, that they are moving towards that direction. The other thing that we have seen in the fight against COVID-19, we are seeing an increasing collective nature of African leaders putting a force together, trying to prompt Western and Northern countries to start thinking about Africa as equal humans. In other words, to stop hoarding vaccines because they already have enough. There are other people in this part of the world that need those vaccines if we all think about our shared humanity. So my response to that, we say we are seeing gradual progress towards our collective addressing of the issues as African voices, but there is still much to be done to be able to cross the mental barriers, the psychological barriers, the inequities, income inequities, and other differentials that really weaken our capacity to put up a collective voice on the global platform.
Wonderful thoughts right there. If you're joining us, this is the Raw Leadership Talk, brought to you live from the Africa Center for Public Speaking. And we are glad today to have Dr. Paul Kariuki joining us all the way from Durban, South Africa. Where are you connecting with us from? And we would like to hear your thoughts. If you have any thoughts, even as we move forward, your observation, get involved, engage with us in this particular discussion. Dr. Paul, elections in Africa are still a volatile issue. Why is it so? And what can African countries do then to necessitate smooth transitions?
Dan, there are many factors that have led to a situation where we see elections in Africa to become a very volatile exercise rather than a happy exercise. It should be a very happy exercise because it's a demonstration of political maturity in a society, but at the same time also saying that, you know, we appreciate the principles of democracy and we are able to appreciate the fact that leadership change is not a weakness. And so what we have seen, I would group the main factors that really contribute to the volatility to three things. One is our weak institutionalization of democratic systems and processes. We started well as a continent in many countries, but over time, as I said earlier, we have seen a continual erosion of those systems by allowing self-interest to supersede citizens' interest, because any public leadership opportunity, it's not about serving the individual, it's about serving the public, the masses. And when we start overriding the processes that help us to maintain a cautionary advocacy level around individuals leading countries, then we start weakening the systems that should help us to emphasize governance, good governance. So that weakness is one of the contributing factors that create volatility situations around elections. The second aspect is what I call the rise of neo-patrimonial character of the state. In other words, neo-patrimonialism is a state where individuals in the ruling elite start using state resources to buy favors or loyalty from their clients, whoever the clients may be. And when that gets to that point, we see an increase of what we're seeing right now in many countries on Africa and even around the world, not only in Africa, corruption, where political elite becomes so susceptible to corruptive practices to the extent they will sell a nation to protect their interest. And the third factor is what I would call the nature of contestation of the political power itself. In other words, we are seeing less and less appreciation of political competitiveness, which is one of the important aspects of a thriving democracy. We must have political competitiveness, but it doesn't have to end up being violent. Yeah. And by nature, politics are competitive. That's why we have opposition and then we have the ruling elite. But they don't have to be violent for us to be able to appreciate and say that democracy doesn't work. Democracy does work. It depends on how we define what democracy is. So for me, those three big factors contribute to the state why we see elections becoming a volatile issue on our continent, and it's a very sad state, my brother.
Oh, wonderful thoughts there. And I believe that we need to do something. And as you have said, if our leaders will begin to look at it from that particular positive attitude and begin to approach it in the right way, then we'll begin to have good transitions in this particular continent. Dr. Paul, we are bringing this show to an end. I don't know what are your final thoughts on this particular issue of leadership and governance in the continent of Africa.
I think there are 5 things I would like to leave our viewers with as points of thoughts and perhaps maybe sometime we can get into deeper conversations around them. Firstly, it's to strengthen our democratic and governance systems. They have eroded to an extent that we are seeing contestations that have led to violence, and electoral violence, for example, is damaging psychologically, physically, and structurally. And that's not what it does, because it draws our attention from the most important things like development that we need so badly on this continent. Secondly, I would like to say that we need to return to the respect of the Constitution and the rule of law. Yeah, we cannot build strong societies when we undermine our own constitutions and undermine the rule of law. We create a negative precedence that the next generations that pick up leadership opportunities decide, and that's the way to live. And you constantly see an erosion of good governance and things that should be really inspiring development. The other aspect is to really make sure that we raise leaders that can always supersede self-interests and really serve the public, and become conscious of that fact, that we stop things that we have been seeing lately on our continent. For example, election term, lengthening of election terms, and people want to stay in power for long. We're seeing that it will go to an extent of even destroying the very foundations that made democracy work in the first place. Because now self-interest and what I described as a neo-patriotism becomes the way of life. And when it becomes the way of life, then it becomes those who are closest to political power becomes the people with the real power, and not the public or the masses that should be governing together with the state so that they can prosper their welfare. And lastly, to make sure that we deal decisively with those things that continually threaten our democracy: corruption, poor leadership, and other things that we can name. The list is so long. We must deal with those things very, very decisively as a continent if we are going to make sure that we have what I would call good international citizenship. Whenever we have conflict and jeopardize and threaten our own existence as a continent, we also jeopardize our international social capital or political capital, and it's not in our favor. We need to make sure that our international diplomacy remains sustainable in a way that it allows us to be accepted in those global platforms where we need to be listened to, so that we can shift policies in favor of our African continent. And I think there is hope for that, but there needs to be a clear, deliberate intention to move towards that direction.
Wonderful points right there, Dr. Paul, and we really appreciate. Time will not allow us to continue, but we will definitely bring you back to the Raw Leadership Talk. Our country is geared up towards the election for 2022, and I'm sure such kind of discussion will be very beneficial to the people of Kenya. And I'm sure you, being one of us, you'll be more than happy to
definitely. I'll be more than happy.
Wonderful knowledge. Thank you very much, and may God bless you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Charity Kanoru, I see you watching from Mombasa. Desire Tuishemeze, watching from Bujumbura, Burundi. And Jackson Momanyi, watching from Rongai. Thank you very much for tuning in, even those who didn't say anything, but you are here, tuned in and connected with us. We really, really appreciate. Till next Tuesday, same time, same place. Let's meet here at the Raw Leadership Talk. May God bless you, and see you next time.
Thank you.